Our next speaker is another distinguished Croatian historian, Dr. Jure Krišto. He worked at the Croatian Institute of History and previously taught at several American universities. He holds 2 doctorates, one from University of Notre Dame and other from the University of Zagreb. His scholarly focus on modern and contemporary Croatian history, particularly on the role, activity, significance of the Catholic Church during this period. He is the author of numerous books in which he has pushed the boundaries of historiographical knowledge and interpretations of these topics. And I would particularly highlight his book, Conflict of Symbols, in which, by depicting the clash of ideologies and faiths and politics in the independent state of Croatia and its surroundings, he successfully offers new reflections on the causes of these conflicts in Southeastern Europe. Today, we will have the opportunity to hear something more on persecutions of the Church in Croatia. Dr. Krišto, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning. When the symposium organizer told me that I would be speaking about the persecution of the Church under communism, I was aware that it wouldn't be an easy task. I thought the information should be adopted for those who have had the opportunity to hear more about who haven't had the opportunity to hear more about it, and that the information should be brief. The topic of the communist persecution of the Church in Croatia went from being banned to its great expansion. Indeed, over the past 30 years, the Croatian Institute of History, for instance, has worked on several research projects. Many documents and scholarly papers have also been published. So I hope that condensing all that research into a 20-minute presentation won't be too confusing. I have organized my comments around 3 brief sections. First, preparation of the communists for the takeover. The second, the collapse of the independent state of Croatia. The third, the communist treatment of the Catholic Church. And a short closing section with some remarks. First, communist preparation for the seizure of power. After the victorious successes of the Allies, especially after the capitulation of Italy in 1943, the communist partisans felt that they themselves were getting closer to victory in the war. With good reason, because the Allies considered them their allies, even though their goal was a socialist revolution. The partisans were led by the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, with Josip Broz Tito at its head. The goal of the communists was to establish a totalitarian system of rule dictatorship of the proletariat, which Lenin defined and Stalin confirmed as, quote, the rule of the proletariat over the bourgeoisie, unlimited by law and based on violence. Maybe we should read it again, but a few years ago, I wrote an article in which I argued that it was inevitable that communists would commit a lot of killings and other crimes because that was their ideology. And this quote is a confirmation of that thesis. At least that's how I think about it. Tito confirmed Lenin's and Stalin's definition, declaring that revolution is a cruel thing, and whatever stood in the way of its realization must be subdued, must disappear. Tito further enabled, quotation marks, enabled the party to work efficiently by establishing the Department for the Protection of the People. This awkward linguistic construct in every way is better remembered by its acronym, OZNA. But it is in fact an intelligence and counterintelligence service. This happened a year before the end of the war on May 13th, 1944. Second point, the collapse of the independent state of Croatia. On May 6, 1945, the authorities of the independent state of Croatia ordered the withdrawal of the armed forces toward the Austrian border in the hope that they would be accepted by the Allies. Many civilians retreated with the army in carts or on foot. Some reports from the British Army stated that about 300,000 people had surrendered and that about 600,000 more soldiers and civilians were moving towards the Austrian border where the British Corps was stationed. Unfortunately, Count Nikolai Tolstoy did not come. It would be great to that he was with us because he wrote quite a bit about that. As is known, the British Army, which was responsible for the war zone on behalf of the Allies, did not accept this crowd of refugees and fugitives from the communism, but instead assured them that the communists would treat them according to international norms. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and the majority of those men, women, and children who were on that border became part of a national tragedy. What happened after the return from the border became a mass massacre committed by the communists. Keep in mind that the massacre took place after the war ended, officially. Those who were not killed after crossing the Slovenian border on the return to Yugoslavia were lined up in 4 rows and submitted to forced march. From Slovenia, they were guided via two routes through northern Croatia, Vojvodina, Banat, Bačka, and Serbia, all the way to the Bulgarian border. The other route went through Slavonia with branches to Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially towards Banja Luka. Banja Luka is a significant place. If they could not walk any further, they were killed on the spot. Members of the Croatian army were separated, killed, and buried in mass graves, such as tank trenches, mines that were closed and walled up, natural pits, etc. We will hear about that a little more detail later. An OSNA report from July 1945 illustrates how the communists treated the captured parts of the army of the independent state of Croatia. Listing the regular and reserve branches of the army of the independent state of Croatia and indicating their numbers, the report states that they were resolved and some sent to the camps or are being processed. The total number of those resolved, it is stated, was 17,000. The term resolved means, of course, they were killed. Third point, the communist actions against the Catholic clergy. Communists entered Zagreb on May 8, 1945. Zagreb was a deserted city because a large number of citizens had retreated, as had the army, towards Slovenia, where, as I said, they hoped to reach the Allies who would accept them as fugitives from communists. On the other hand, the communists knew that the church hierarchy had no sympathy for the communists, so by arriving in Zagreb, they believed that they need to secure mass support for the party and create new social values for which the media of the time, radio and the press, were the most suitable means. Therefore, through the Department for Agitation and Propaganda, Agitprop, immediately after their arrival in Zagreb, they undertook propaganda against Archbishop Stepinac personally and the Catholic Church in general. The Church was usually portrayed as fascist, clerical fascist, anti-national, and reactionary. Consequently, the higher church hierarchy and clergy were accused of collaborating with the occupier, of spreading hatred between nations and religions, and of inciting and participating in war crimes. Archbishop Stepinac initially responded to invitations to attend public events and manifestations, but he soon had to stop because even in his presence, the Catholic Church and he himself were harshly attacked. The day after Stepinac's return from detention on June 5, 1945, the Archbishop's Chancery sent a letter to the Presidency of the Government of Federal Croatia, which listed forms of terrorizing the Catholic community, such as removing crosses from classrooms, organizing work actions on Sunday mornings so that young people would not go to church, organizing indecent parties for minors, etc. On the same day, the Archbishop's Chancery Office in Zagreb sent a letter signed by Auxiliary Bishop Salis Sevis to the Presidency of the Government of Federal Croatia about physical and verbal attack on church representatives, about the arrests of bishops and priests, about the camps and imprisonment of priests in them, about the confiscation of church property, and about the forced conversion to orthodoxy of those Catholics who had been forced to accept orthodoxy during the previous regime. The communist authorities in Zagreb did not respond to the Chancery letter. So on June 25, 45, Archbishop Stepinac personally signed a letter to the Prime Minister Vladimir Bakaric, in which he reinforced the content of the previous letter, with new examples of hostile attitudes towards the Church, violence against priests and civilians, imprisonment in camps, and murders of priests. Instead of answering, Bakaric decided to visit the Archbishop on June 28, 45. Stepinac greeted him with a list of detained civilians and shared his opinion that people were being unsettled by imprisonment due to the vague and broadly interpreted accusations of, quote, collaboration with the enemy. Ironically, the communists would use the same vague and broadly interpreted accusations at the Stepinac trial. In July 1945, Archbishop Stepinac wrote to Bakaric again about the death sentences of priests and civilians based on strange legal criteria and without proper juridical proceedings. The Archbishop wrote several more letters to Bakaric and other bodies of the communist government in Croatia, in which he tried to convince them of the unfounded accusations against the Catholic Church and its officials, and to persuade them to change the party's attitude towards the Church and towards the narod that belongs to the Church. Military courts served the communists to begin to implement their intention to eliminate political opponents during the war. They were established by the decree of military courts on May 24, 1944. After the end of the war, these courts operated in accordance with the activities of the secret police, special army units, and the War Crimes Commission, with the sole intention of eliminating all potential political opponents. In addition to trying the leaders of the independent state of Croatia, these courts organized express trials of representatives of all religious communities, especially prominent Catholic priests. For example, the military court of the Zagreb City Command convicted 58 people of June 29, 45, including 14 religious officials. I have to jump over certain things. After implementing revolutionary legislation that eliminated all opposition to their totalitarian system, the communists introduced civil courts. Numerous Catholic priests, again, were imprisoned, often sentenced to long sentences and forced labor. Speaking of sentences to forced labor, I single out the relatively small province of the Herzegovinian Franciscans. The communists killed 66 of their friars, professors at the Franciscan Gymnasium in Široki Brijeg, among others, and parish priests in local parishes. It is also illustrative that members of the same province were cumulatively sentenced to 215 years in prison, and that most of them served their sentences to the end. For my final point, sort of a conclusion, is communists and responsibility for victims. I forgot, before that, I forgot to conclude the previous one. The culmination of all these trials was the conviction of, on October 11, 1946, of Zagreb Archbishop Alojzije Stepinac to a sentence of imprisonment with forced labor for 16 years and the loss of political and civil rights for 5 years. Now I come to the conclusion. As long as the communists were in power, the official position was that Tito and his closest associates were not responsible for the crimes committed against thousands of prisoners of war because they were allegedly not informed in detail. Such claims can still be heard today from those who continue to praise many aspects of the former state. Such an interpretation cannot be true in a system in which absolutely everything depended on the man who was at the head of the party, and that was Tito. However, statements by Tito himself have been preserved, which undoubtedly confirm his direct participation in the crimes as the person who managed the entire process. It was recorded that Tito was in the areas where mass killings of Croatian military units and civilians were carried out from May 19 to June 6, 1945. For Sunday, May 20th, 45, it was noted that Tito, unannounced, arrived in Varaždin. In the address to the citizens, he said that, quote, he did not come to Varaždin officially or to talk about politics, but to visit the units of the Yugoslav army that are carrying out important tasks in the area in the final showdown with the Croatian state. End of quote. In his speech in Ljubljana, it was cited here yesterday, but anyhow, just a short segment. In his speech in Ljubljana, Tito was most explicit. Quote, we have liquidated 200,000 bandits, and we have captured as many more. The hand of our justice has reached them. End of quote. In conclusion, the communists killed hundreds of thousands of Croatian soldiers and civilians who had been brought back from Austria. They killed thousands more in other ways. This is the true toll of the Bleiburg tragedy of the Croatian people. Many of these killed were faithful Catholics, so it was a tragedy for the Church as well. Thank you very much.